The movie opens with a man named Gaspard Snow skating around Paris. He hurries to join his dad Camille's show. There, his father introduces his son and beckons him onto the stage to perform for the audience, along with the Barbarettes. Gaspard gracefully climbs as he begins to sing soulfully in the cabaret, formerly known as the Flower Burger. The small audience in there is captivated by his wonderful performance as they cheer him on. There, a man named Zazu arrives and tells a code word phrase to the waitress, who guides him to the inner room of the bar where Gaspard is performing for his small audience. It's a small boat cabaret with 2 chambers. The other chamber requires customers to say the password before they can be allowed in. As Gaspard sings gracefully, a lady in the shadows, hidden by the smoke, just closely observes the scene of this man's mesmerizing show. It's an amazing performance, and everyone is thrilled as he keeps singing with his exceptional backing vocalists enhancing the atmosphere. Later, Zazu, the client at the bar, leaves feeling a bit unsteady on his feet and tipsy. As he walks, he hears a woman singing and is captivated by her voice. He follows the sound as if being under a spell and ends up entering the waters. The night ends, and Camille brings Gaspard his earnings for the night. A bit underachieving for him as he makes fun of it resembling his piggy bank when he was 4 years old. Camille breaks the news to his son that he got an offer from a restaurant chain that is willing to buy the Flower Burger, but Gaspard would have none of it. He refers to memories of the place as ghosts. He looks at the photos on the wall. Gaspard dreams of living up to his grandmother's standards, but fails at achieving this, so he just expresses his emotions through music. However, the old man wants his son to move on and not remain stuck in the past. He hopes that they can put certain things behind them and finally move forward. His father then takes a glance at Gaspard and tells him he looks like a zombie and should go home. Gaspard manages to make it home to his apartment, but is startled by Rossi, his intruding neighbor who has been spying on him. He tries to avoid her, but is not quick enough as she catches up with him. She offers him a jewel for every time he comes home alone. She just hopes Gaspard doesn't end up lonely like her. Once inside, Rossi tries to eavesdrop, but there is nothing to listen to as Gaspard is in his lonely apartment and is met by nothing else but his little Johnny Cash, the gray cat, which is all he has for company. Gaspard's room is not what you'd expect from an adult man. It's filled with books, toys, a row of guitars, rubber ducks in his bathroom, and figurines which just confirm his father's belief that he needs to move on from the past. He is struck by memories when he picks up a figurine that instantly reminds him of his grandmother, and he kisses it. Gaspard is a very sentimental individual as evidenced by the contents of his room. He goes to bed right next to Johnny, his cat who's already tucked in on the bed, while listening to a vinyl record, the Barbarettes. Meanwhile, right outside the building, an old man is out fishing when he hears the same beautiful singing that Zazu had earlier heard and decides to follow it. Like a puppet being controlled, he enters the water too. The next day tends to be worse than the previous one for Gaspard, as he is greeted early in the morning with aggravating news. He meets 2 men at his door, making demands for his voice-o-graph. Despite his disapproval of his father selling Flower Burger, Camille goes ahead to sell it. Gaspard is extremely upset as he skates through the streets of Paris to go and confront his father. He barges into the boat and is upset about his father's decision. He further makes claims that if his mother and grandmother were there, they would have fought to keep the cabaret. However, Camille is more upset that his son paints him as a nonchalant and insensitive parent. And so in that anger, he orders Gaspard out, who leaves more angrily than he came. That night, as Gaspard walks home, he finds something, or more specifically someone lying at the docks, half nude and unconscious. A concerned Gaspard immediately rushes up to this persona and wants to help as he covers them up with his jacket. To his shock, it's a mermaid. He rushes to the streets and tries to get a ride to the hospital, in dire need to save her life. Who in their right mind would take an injured mermaid to the hospital? After 2 failed attempts, he does get a vehicle which he trades for his skates. It's a rickshaw, and he uses it to get to the hospital. Meanwhile, this mysterious woman is still unconscious. At the hospital, we are met with a couple, Milena and Victor, who are having a little moment. They converse quietly outside the hospital. Milena tells Victor that she is not feeling well. Victor immediately jumps to conclusions and assumes that she might be pregnant. However, Milena, smiling, cautions him not to get ahead of himself, that it could just be a reaction or an allergy. Despite Milena's warning, Victor remains optimistic that she is pregnant. Just then, the woman receives a call for a patient and runs back inside. Gaspard arrives at the hospital, parks outside, and immediately sprints in. Unfortunately, he doesn't get attended to because he doesn't have the woman's health insurance card. Meanwhile, the doctor, Victor, discovers the mermaid inside the tuk-tuk parked outside the hospital. He uses his stethoscope to check her health, but as he does so, the mermaid wakes up and starts singing. As she does, Victor loses his balance and struggles to stay upright. Suddenly, the mermaid faints. Gaspard hears noises coming from outside and rushes back to where he left his mermaid lady. He then finds a barking dog that has discovered the mermaid's tail, visible from the tuk-tuk. In a hurry, Gaspard hops into the vehicle and speeds away. Gaspard is now helpless and desperate as the mermaid is still lying unconscious at the back of the vehicle. He speeds through the streets, still very concerned about the well-being of the mermaid. On the other hand, Victor faints in the hospital, while in a conversation with his girlfriend Milena about the mermaid. She initially thinks he's teasing, but is terrified when he falls to the ground and loses consciousness. The man is immediately rushed in for treatment. After arriving home, Gaspard places the still unconscious mermaid in his bathtub filled with water. He quickly puts a t-shirt on her, and as he does, he averts his gaze from her, being careful not to be disrespectful as she's... What a gentleman. Suddenly, the mermaid opens her eyes and sees Gaspard in front of her. She's stunned as Gaspard introduces himself. After trying to take his life twice and failing, she stretches out her hand towards him. He thinks she is just leaning in for a handshake and obliges, but in essence, she's trying to take him out. He offers her some food and goes to get it. As he leaves, the mermaid tries to get out of the bathtub, but she's still in a lot of pain. She grunts in agony and can't move. She also has a wound on her tail. Gaspard is cooking for Lula, the mermaid, when his dad calls him on the phone. A flood has caused a crowd at Flower Burger, and Gaspard's dad wants him to perform, and to bring with him the lady he hears singing over the phone. However, Gaspard is busy with Lula, whose tail is bleeding blue, and so he hangs up. He goes back into the bathroom and tries to help this mermaid in distress, but she is initially scared of him approaching her with a pair of scissors and cotton wool. She has now tried multiple times to charm him with her voice, but keeps failing at it. She tries again to use her singing magic on Gaspard, but it doesn't work, as he dresses her wound. As her initial apprehension downs a bit, Lula introduces herself, and Gaspard is surprised to hear her speak. She coughs and Gaspard rushes to get her some food. Lula eats only one bite and asks to go home. However, the man insists on her staying to heal. But Lula explains that if she's not back in the water in 2 sunrises, she will die. Despite this, Gaspard still wants her to heal before leaving. Gaspard turns off the light and leaves Lula alone for the night. Meanwhile, back at the hospital, Milena is distressed and worried about Victor, who is speaking strangely and has been taken to the emergency room. She fears for his life. But then, unfortunately, he passes away. This leaves Milena in a state of grief. On the other hand, it's quite an adventure with Gaspard and his new flatmate. Lula is baffled as to why Gaspard has not been affected by her singing magic. She lets him know that anyone who hears her voice instantly falls in love with her, and their hearts explode. But a teasing Gaspard says his heart exploded long ago. The mermaid fears his heart will explode sooner or later, but Gaspard feels he's immune and won't take her back until she heals. Meanwhile, a disheartened Milena is still overwhelmed and discombobulated by the tragic passing of her partner Victor. She had told him that night at the hospital that chances were that he was going to be a father. But now he's no longer alive to see it come to pass or not. While waiting for the results of the pregnancy test in the bathroom, the woman discovers that she is indeed pregnant. As the test turns out to be positive, the grieving woman proceeds to inquire from the lady at the hospital counter if anything weird had happened the previous night. But she only makes mention of a strange shoeless man who had left his book behind. Milena is grateful for any information she can get at the moment as she takes the book and begins to flip through its pages. Back in his home, Gaspard tries to make his guest, Lula, comfortable before he leaves the apartment for work. He sets up a movie for her to watch on a small TV and heads out. On his way out, he meets Rossi, the intrusive neighbor who is thrilled that Gaspard finally has some company. The man rushes to the hospital in search of his book. There, Milena is searching for any leads, and she finds the scales of the mermaid along with her blue blood. After asking about his book, Gaspard leaves the hospital and arrives at the restaurant where he works. Back at the apartment, after Gaspard leaves, Rossi sneaks into his apartment after getting his keys from under his doormat. She gets in and is immediately in search. She then enters the bathroom where Lula is lying in the bathtub fully clothed. This fascinates her. Rossi goes ahead to compliment Lula's mermaid outfit and begins to tell her about Gaspard's family history, his iconic grandmother and the Flower Burger, a restaurant his grandmother founded. Rossi describes the restaurant as a peaceful, joyful, and comforting haven where people could unwind, dance, and have a good time. Sylvia, Gaspard's grandmother, was a talented singer, writer, and poet. She was all about that boho lifestyle, living free and embracing her artistic spirit. She was the brains behind the invention of the voice-o-graph to help them send coded messages. Before Sylvia passed away, she passed down to Gaspard the Flower Burger book, a book filled with memories and accomplishments, and how she believed her grandson would make a sequel of the book someday. Rossi tells Lula that she gave her all that information because she believes that Gaspard needs emotional support, and she's the right one for him. She says he needs to be loved, especially with all that he's been through romantically, having multiple failed relationships, and that the restaurant's success depends on Gaspard's well-being. As Rossi leaves, she asks Lula to be discreet about their conversation, and also come to her for any help. Milna, after finding the drops of strange blue liquid on the streets, decides to send them to the lab for testing. The results are very unusual and disturbing for Milna. Meanwhile, Gaspard realizes he has lost the Flower Burger book, so he goes to talk to his father about his emotional state. Gaspard is utterly upset about losing the book he inherited from his grandmother, but his father advises him to see the loss as a sign and move on from it. He tells his son to not let failure define him, but to bounce back from it. It's a very intimate moment between the father and son as they both hug. Moments later, Gaspard receives a call informing him that his apartment is on fire, a rather random and unsettling news. Turns out, Lula, who had tried cigarettes and didn't like the outcome, threw the already lit stick and accidentally knocked over a bottle of cologne, causing the fire. Gaspard immediately rushes home in his tuk-tuk, and upon arrival, he is informed by the firefighters that he's lucky to not have his entire house burnt down. The house is filled with smoke and covered in ash, but Gaspard's main concern is not being able to find Lula. After searching all over the place, he finally finds her hiding under the bed in his room. He lifts her, places her on the bed, and expresses his concern for coming back to a nearly burnt house. Gaspard takes Lula to his neighbor Rossi's house and instructs her to lock Lula in the bathroom. However, his neighbor is concerned about how pale he looks. He makes nothing of it and leaves. Gaspard rushes back to his apartment, which is now covered in ash and everything is burnt, including his piano and toys, and he watches the strings of his guitar pulling out. After returning to Rossi's apartment, Lula apologizes for her mistake and Gaspard forgives her. Lula requests Gaspard to sing for her before he takes her back to the water, and they both have a little concert in Rossi's bathroom. Hearing how well the two sync, Gaspard decides to make a music record together. Lula and Gaspard have arranged a date night at the Flower Burger before Lula has to go back to the water. Rossi helps Lula get dressed up while Gaspard prepares himself. Meanwhile, Milna has found out about a mysterious mermaid in Paris and is determined to find her. Gaspard and his mermaid companion arrive at the cabaret. There, Gaspard, being a gentleman, puts her in a carrier and carefully takes her inside. Once there, Camille meets Lula and is thrilled that his son brought a date. He quickly gets them a table and ensures they are promptly attended to and served drinks. While sitting at a table, Gaspard and Lula engage in a conversation. Gaspard compliments Lula, calling her nice, but Lula responds by admitting again that she had tried to harm him. However, Gaspard teases it off. As they both stare at each other and chuckle awkwardly, Gaspard comes up with an idea for Lula to perform at the Flower Burger. He thinks that having a mermaid perform every night would be good for business, as everyone would come to watch. However, Lula reminds him of her dangerous voice that slays people when they hear her sing. In the meantime, Milna also arrives at the Flower Burger and finds Gaspard's tuk-tuk outside. She confidently enters the cabaret holding Gaspard's Flower Burger book and proceeds to find a table. Lula and her savior both have a good time at the Flower Burger. Gaspard's old man checks in on them every minute to keep them entertained. Lula shares her story of being the only surviving mermaid after losing her mother to a sailor who stabbed her in the heart. She also talks about singing, how she uses it as a weapon to defend herself, and how nobody has ever survived hearing her sing. As they continue to chat, Gaspard has something in common with Lula. He has had the same number of failed relationships as the estimated number of sailors Lula has taken out, which is 44. Love is in the air as Gaspard and Lula have the dance floor all to themselves as their record plays. He holds her in his arms, her tails visible, and they stare deeply into each other's eyes as they dance. How in the world is nobody noticing a giant tail peeking out of her dress? On the other side, Milna sits down and carefully reads through the book out loud, taking her time to absorb all the information, the drawings, the pictures, and every single detail. As she unknowingly recites the password to the Flower Burger, the nearby waitress hears and signals her to enter. Milner rises from her seat and makes her way inside. There, she carefully observes the activity in the room with keen interest. Meanwhile, Gaspard and Lula leave the cabaret with only 30 minutes left for them, until Lula must return to the water. Determined to make the most of their time together, they play the harmonica in Gaspard's tuk-tuk, and then proceed to go to the aquarium. Lula jumps in the water, and then Gaspard follows. While in the water, the two become completely lost in each other's gaze. They adore each other. As the moonlight bathes the water inside the aquarium, they both are deep in, their eyes locked, igniting a love both forbidden and extraordinary. He is a dreamer enchanted by her aquatic allure, and she is a charming siren whose love might slay her human savior, but she loves him nonetheless. All of a sudden, Gaspard's chest tightens, and he begins to choke for breath. In that moment, Lula leans in to kiss Gaspard. The world fades away, leaving only the intoxicating sensation of their passionate connection. The following day, Gaspard takes Lula back to the water, even though she was supposed to return by midnight, and it is now morning. Gaspard parks his tuk-tuk by the river and tries to convince Lula to stay and live with him, promising to take care of her. However, he is well aware of the dangers involved, and it is too risky for her to stay. Despite only being in love for 2 days, Gaspard is willing to do anything to be with his little mermaid, even learning scuba diving. He then drives them both back to his house, claiming to have one last surprise for Lula. Gaspard makes a little presentation for Lula with fish and ocean-related things. Lula loves it and compliments him for the effort. She then asks Gaspard to get her real fish, as it would make the moment even more special. Gaspard runs out of his house to get the fish for his mermaid love. Meanwhile, Lula calls on Rossi for help. The ever-available Rossi comes immediately, and Lula confides in her about her plan to escape from Gaspard. Rossi is shocked and protests this. She has never seen Gaspard so happy before, and thinks it would break him if Lula were to leave him now. However, Lula insists that in her defense, she just doesn't want to hurt him, and pleads with Rossi to take her back to her home in the docks. Gaspard, who went out to get some fish for Lula, returns. Upon arrival, he finds out that both his and his neighbor's doors are open. Concerned, he hastily enters his house and finds Milna in his bathroom collecting samples of the bath water. Gaspard is enraged and demands to know where Lula is. Milna responds that Lula is somewhere where she can't harm anyone anymore. Milna accuses Gaspard of being under Lula's control and warns him that Lula intends to harm him just like she harmed Victor. Suddenly, Gaspard loses consciousness and falls. Both Gaspard and Lula are currently in the hospital, unconscious. Milna's lab assistant is concerned that she is taking too many blood samples from Lula, which could end up being fatal for the poor mermaid. However, Milna is not concerned about this and dismisses him. She doesn't admit it, but the woman is overwhelmed and carried away by the recent death of Victor, and keeping the mermaid hostage like this is her way of coping. Milna is alone with Lula, who wakes up and immediately asks about Gaspard's condition. The woman, being insensitive, tells her that Gaspard is dying just like all the men she has been in contact with. Lula is devastated, and tears begin to roll down her cheeks. Meanwhile, Rossi has disguised herself as a doctor and is lurking behind the curtains outside the room. She pretends there is an emergency to get Milna's attention away, and Milna leaves Lula lying in despair. Rossi rushes to Gaspard and helps him get up, and they both disguise themselves as doctors wearing lab coats and face masks as they go to find Lula. They quickly take Lula out of the hospital, speedily rolling her out on a bed. Meanwhile, Milna discovers from the receptionist that her patient is gone, and she is furious. Gaspard and Rossi make their getaway outside the hospital with Lula. They put her in a tub, which Rossi had arranged, filled with salt water. They tie it to Gaspard's tuk-tuk, who takes off with Lula. Just then, Milna arrives. She's furious and claims this is a wrong decision. She shouts at Rossi, telling her that Gaspard is going to perish at this rate. Hearing this, the woman tells her that they went to the Flower Burger. She gets into her vehicle and immediately goes after them. Gaspard speeds through the streets, but is stopped in his tracks as he suddenly runs out of gas and has to make a pit stop. He pulls over and stops at a gas station. Meanwhile, Milna realizes that Rossi misled her about Gaspard's whereabouts. She receives a call informing her that Gaspard is heading towards the country road. She grunts and immediately makes a turn to find the two lovers on a romantic escapade. At the gas station, the hopeless lover Gaspard goes inside to purchase a walkie-talkie and pay for the gas. He seems unsteady on his feet and struggles to find his balance. The stunned seller over the counter looks outside to see a woman in a fishtail sitting inside a bathtub, and Gaspard, who doesn't seem to find his balance. But the old man does not comment. After leaving the gas station, Gaspard gives one pair of walkie-talkies to Lula so they can communicate, and then the couple continue their journey together. As they leave, the old man comes out of the store to watch them drive away. The two journey through the night. As Gaspard drives, he's struck by memories of the little but priceless moments he had spent with his charming mermaid. They chat briefly on their walkie-talkies, but then Lula loses her pair as they slip through her hand while she falls unconscious throughout the ride. They arrive at their destination, and Gaspard, who's still unsteady in his steps, manages to carry Lula and gets them both into the water. They go deep into it as Gaspard holds Lula in his arms, close to himself. It's a sad and emotional goodbye between the two lovers as Gaspard watches his love disappear into the water. Just when he thinks that he has found true love, it fades quickly and leaves him broken. Milna arrives, but meets Gaspard face down and unconscious on the shore. She struggles initially, but soon her professional ethics and a push from her late lover win her over, and she immediately performs CPR on him. Gaspard coughs and comes back to life. Sometime later, Gaspard, who is still hurt, lays in the bathtub as he listens to the message from a biologist named Pierre Martin at St. Andre Hospital. The biologist informs him that the pearls that Lula had shed as tears in Gaspard's bathtub, on the day she planned to escape from him, have been analyzed and are shown to be of pure quality and worth a fortune. The biologist believes that these pearls belong to Gaspard, as the tears were initially intended for him. Gaspard decides to give the pearls to his father and leaves with the flower burger boat, accompanied by his cat. His father bids him farewell, hoping for his betterment. While on the boat, Gaspard flips through his flower burger book and smiles. He might just be ready to move on now and write that sequel after all. The things that love makes us do.